If my people, which are called by my name, shall humble themselves and pray, and seek my face, and turn from their wicked ways, then will I hear from heaven, and will forgive their sin, and will heal their land.
We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Hello, Christian Patriots, and welcome to Church and State, where we strive to plug you into the pew and plug you into politics. I'm your host, Caleb Collier. With me, as always, Pastor Gabe Blomgren.
How you doing, brother?
I'm doing very well. It's good to see you.
The COVID madness continues.
It does, and we'll be addressing that a little bit on today's show, but definitely on some of the other shows that we're doing this week as well.
Deconstructing the plandemic.
Indeed. All right, so we're going to get right into our guest, another very special guest. Got introduced to him through Jackie Gallion, but doing some incredible things with hyperbaric chambers. It's really interesting.
Yeah, his research is cutting edge.
Yes, so we've got Dr. Ted Fogarty, MD. He's a diagnostic radiology specialist in Bismarck, North Dakota, has been practicing for 22 years. He graduated from the University of Nebraska College of Medicine in 1998 and specializes in diagnostic radiology. Dr. Fogarty, thank you very much for joining Church and State.
Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. So let's get right into exactly what you do, because you do a very specialized medicine is what you practice here. But it's something that, as you were explaining off camera, you've seen some incredible results with. You were telling me about one child, actually, in particular, who, well, actually, I'll let you tell the story. Go ahead and just get right into it.
Sure. Well, I've been blessed by God to be really enlightened by one of my, a physician I consider really a brother in medicine. He's our nation's premier researcher in neurological hyperbaric medicine, and his name is Dr. Paul G. Harch. And he's been at LSU in the emergency department, and the dean, we call him the virtual dean, because there isn't truly a deanship for hyperbaric medicine, but we call him the dean of hyperbaric medicine in America. And so Dr. Harch has for over 3 decades been using hyperbaric chambers and various protocols that are very specific to the individual person and patient in really fine-tuning a brain rehabilitation program for individual patients. And he started doing this in the early to mid 80s. There's an incredible case, and I'm really a bit of a historian of hyperbaric medicine through my work with Dr. Harch and the International Hyperbaric Medical Foundation. But just this incredible God-given ability for our own cells to really repair themselves with the right mix of physics and medical gases and glutathione synthesis inside the cell. And these are kind of some complex terms, which I'll be kind of throwing out during our discourse and circling back into a real human story for how this all works. But one of the seminal cases that Dr. Harch and Dr. Keith Van Meter had at LSU over 30 years ago was in 1983. There was a diving accident that involved a commercial diver who was 111 feet underneath the surface of the Mississippi River, and he lost his entire diving apparatus over his head and neck, and his helmet basically got sucked into the dredge, and the supervising ship and commercial diving operations on the surface had to extract him from 111 feet of water. That then caused an immediate bends. Mm-hmm. So all the nitrogen gas out of his body, and he blew up kind of like Michelin Man, and he was this dead crew member basically who had been without oxygen for about 15 to 18 minutes. And the the friends and family that this guy worked with every day called immediately to LSU emergency department and asked Dr. Van Meter what to do, and he said, I've been working on these research findings for using hyperbaric oxygen to revive mouse tissues and mice from being basically offline from oxygen for up to 23 minutes. So this is a Hail Mary pass, but if you put this man in the 6-atmosphere chamber that you have there on that commercial diving operation ship, there's a chance he can come back. And so that's what they did. They literally revived this commercial diver about 20 minutes out from not having any oxygen, and it was a big deal in medicine.
Did they have an onboard hyperbaric chamber on the ship?
Yeah, right.
Wow.
So they had the commercial diving industry, and you're putting these people in very dangerous places when you're doing dredge work, and so they the Gulf oil diving teams, they all have hyperbaric chambers available to them on their seafaring operations, so that if somebody does come up acutely with the bends, even within 1 minute of having these nitrogen gas bubbles coming out in solution in your bloodstream, you're already damaging people's brains. And
so did this individual have any deficits from one being submerged for that long without any oxygen, as well as from the bends?
So long story short is that he recovered almost fully, but had almost like a stroke-like pattern of some leg and gait issues that then Dr. Van Meter passed him off to Dr. Harch, who did his more traditional long-term lower and slower neurologic healing protocol of 1.5 atmospheres, 100% oxygen over 40 to 50 hours. And so over the course of the next year, after he was acutely saved by high dose hyperbaric therapy, then he had a more intermediate dose that then gave his cells in his brain the electrons off of the oxygen and the energy to start pulling in a whole lot of these precursor amino acids, these vital amino acids, into his brain cells, so that glutathione could then go and help trigger a whole bunch of regenerative medicine plays, basically encoded in all of our DNA. So in God's accounting system of our cells, when there's a lot of intracellular glutathione, it's a signal to the cell. It's like, hey, we've got a lot of cash flow here. Let's start rebuilding and repairing and fixing some things that have been a little bit offline here. And so that's kind of the simple way this all works, is that the oxygen provides the energy, the currency, and the molecular gold, so to speak, inside of the cells. It comes in with the synthesis of glutathione inside of our cells, which then parlays into 144 different pathways that are directly impacted by glutathione synthesis.
Quick question, Dr. Fogarty. When he was in the hyperbaric chamber, going back to that story, just hopefully revealing the miraculousness of it, was anyone doing resuscitation, or did they literally bring him in there dead, turn on the machine, and just watch?
Yeah, so that's exactly what happened. This is a molecular AED system.
Oh, wow.
So when you go to you're in the shopping mall and you see the AED, and these things are everywhere now, right?
Right.
So
defibrillator.
So you're directly, by direct current physics, you're directly restarting and recharging a small set of neurons in your heart to get them to start to their coordinated firing that is our cardiac brain.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what Dr. Van Meter and his research coming out of the late 70s with mice was trying to build for our country was actually a molecular AED system where you could have people who were just having strokes and heart attacks get into ambulances equipped with hyperbaric chambers.
Wow.
and then flood the body with all of this oxygen, this really great oxygen molecule that is what powers our every thought, our every spiritual act, our every word, and bring these people into a healing environment pre-hospital in the ambulance, and just let our natural intelligence systems encoded in our DNA start to rebuild and repair and do all this work for us. And thereby doing that, the plan that Dr. Van Meter and Dr. Harch had in pre-Katrina days, actually, they had this almost off the ground, was to have these hyperbaric pods on ambulances basically roll off the ambulance and directly connect to a large multi-place chamber. Now, when we talk about large multi-place chambers, we're talking about chambers that are as big as, like some of the early aircraft, like a DC-17 or something, 20-person hyperbaric environment chamber that pods in, and, just like the space station work and in the space environment, those spacecrafts are hyperbaric chambers in a zero pressure environment.
It's funny. This sounds like a science fiction type of book or movie, but the reality is it's an extremely non-invasive way of addressing medical emergencies.
Yeah. I like to think of it as in medicine, what we're really doing is we're helping our patients' bodies heal themselves. But this is like the most powerful, I consider hyperbaric chambers as the operating suites of God. Like literally, there are billions of incredible needles and scalpels and things, and your own pharmaceutical company basically being run right out of your own cellular biology when you judiciously and appropriately, under physician, kind of understanding and practices, really pack those oxygen molecules into your cells. Your body has a regenerative capability and ability, and in the modern genomics understandings and assays of what's really going on with these modern gene chip studies, and I actually studied molecular genetics at the University of Chicago, so my being on the physics side of medicine came out of being really, at one time thought I would actually just get a PhD in molecular genetics. But what we're seeing through all of the research data around the world, and this doesn't get into the kind of pharmaceutical American medical mind, but there are literally 8,000 genes that are either increased in their expression that are pro-regenerative, and some of those genes are coming out of there's big families of genes that are turned on and switched on in our chromosomes that are regenerative class families of genes and proteins. And so those are all getting switched on once the cell recognizes through the increased glutathione expression, hey, we've got some extra energy, we've got some extra cash. The glutathione goes and opens up the DNA where all of these regenerative proteins are encoded, and a lot of those proteins are actively running when we're in our mother's wombs. Right. They are fetal kind of linked genes and nuclear. Our chromosomes have certain triggers for the appropriate environmental situation to turn on these regenerative proteins, and so anyway, it's this incredible. I call them the mitochondrial resurrection protocols. It's like
a Lazarus chamber.
Yeah,
it is
interesting.
I'm a scuba diver. I've been diving for years. I take my kids diving, and I've had to come to the surface quickly, but while exhaling, I've never had an emergency like freak out. But I've always thought that these hyperbaric chambers were for, pretty much divers only in these circumstances where people have nitrogen in their system that they have to get out. Why is it that you see the suppression in the medical industry of these uses in other areas? This is like kind of a one-sided object. Everybody just thinks hyperbaric chamber. You hear stories of like Michael Jackson owned one or something like that, but it's like, why is it suppressed?
Here's where this is so easy. It's threatening. So, Dr. Harch and I published in January of 2019, the same month that Georgia State and Dr. Crum and Dr. Julia Hilliard, they published how to shut down all RNA viral pandemics, basically, by showing how high levels of intracellular glutathione can really shut off the replication cycle switch for all RNA viruses. And they did it in Zika viruses in human placental cells, which is really just an interesting concept. But that same month, Dr. Harch and I also published how to reverse the effects of Alzheimer's as demonstrated in PET imaging, which is the gold standard for brain imaging of dementia, as well as, the clinical correlation and neurological correlation there. And we did that. That protocol was Dr. Harch's protocol, and it only used 2 psi increased pressure and 100% oxygen. It's a very gentle, I like to call it trickle charge on a set of dead batteries, nearly dead batteries. It's like we live in the North Country, and you put your boat batteries on a trickle charger over the winter, so that you keep at least something in that mix for the electrochemical pathways that are moving through all of those cells. So our cells are literally their direct current batteries too. And so by just even a gentle trickle charge and a gentle play of physics, you can reverse cognitive impairments. And there's billions of dollars being spent by all of these pharmaceutical companies to actually create a drug that will use and leverage the NRF2 system. Now, NRF2, I won't get into what it actually stands for, but I just call it Nerf2, like a Nerf football. It's like the holy grail, though, of all of cellular protection agency that runs through our genes. And so when your NRF2 levels are increasing, it starts this cascade of signaling to all the organelles and all the cell different compartments to say, hey, we've got to protect ourselves. We're being invaded by XYZ virus, or there's an injury over in this membrane that we need to fix before we lose all our voltage across that membrane. So NRF2 has been the focus of a huge amount of the world's intellectual property and scientific understanding to be translated into profits for a drug company, XYZ. So, there's AbbVie actually had a play with Riata, and this was published in Reuters and in the mainstream media, for an NRF2 pharmaceutical, NRF2 stimulating pharmaceutical, and there were several patients that died in one of the safety trials, and in like 1 or 2 days, basically their stocks and their stock value went down like $9 billion.
So what it comes down to is the dollar. They're not able. There's the initial cost of building a hyperbaric chamber, but other than that, there's not much cost associated with it.
So if you have a device that cannot really be patented, and gases and there's also noble gases can also be put into medical gas mixes and actually drive these equations and these genomics and protein plays even faster. But when you have all of that encoded in the periodic table and how these basic elements can work in our own bodies, and that's been going on for eons, and yet now we have a global infrastructure of corporatism that is kind of saying, well, hey, if we let this cat out of the bag, then we're not going to be able to make our money XYZ. So this is and within media. So radiologists are kind of the media men and women of science and medicine. But imagine, like the disruptive technologies that have happened to the recording industry, and with, you know, Apple putting out the iPod and Napster coming online and
Right.
basically using piracy over internet,
The industry's changed
networks
because of it.
Yeah.
to literally get these information streams of music out into the world in a way that has basically broken broken the backs of a lot of recording industry.
Absolutely. So the same principle applies to medicine. Now, Dr. Fogarty, I wanted to make sure that we had enough time because behind you, or the image that you're using behind you, is the same brain of an individual, and this is what I was talking about when I first introduced you. You were telling me about this story with this 3-year-old child. And so we don't have too much longer, but I wanted to make sure that we got this story out because it's truly fascinating what occurred here.
Yeah. So this is the Eden Carlson case report image files this is after Eden was a child who had a near drowning injury, and she was basically in a semi-vegetative state. And through the use of intracellular glutathione expression with an air chamber, basically Dr. Hart's protocol in this case, because of the sensitivities of young children, they're so sensitive to oxygen that you really can't use 100% oxygen on children because it's too hard on their vessels, and there's a lot of other factors there. But basically, through 41-hour treatments of 1.3 atmospheres of room air or 20% oxygen, hyperbaric at that fraction, he was able to bring this child's brain back to this degree in volume. And I'm the one who statistically calculated it so that nobody could say, oh, you're fudging the data. And this child went from basically expected to be a semi-vegetative child for the rest of her life and costing the Arkansas insurance companies and Medicaid on the order of maybe $120,000 to $200,000 a year in care costs to a near normal walking, talking child. And there's another case report coming from me that dovetails right into this. And so I got a call from a young family, a father who had seen this case report in the media. This was a viral case report. Everybody in the world saw this in July of 2017. And then there was kind of a media blackout on this by August and September of 2017, where people in America just stopped talking about this miracle case. But in the midst of this, around July 23rd, 2017, I got a phone call from William Dunbar, who he's allowed me to use his family name and discuss this situation as to what to do with their child who was only 1 month old and who had a birth brain injury. And I told him we should simply start feeding his wife, mom, Monica, these 3 amino acids in this mixture that has been formulated by Dr. Albert Crum on a daily basis, and then once a week we can put it in breast milk for their child, who's also named William, little Willie, and in doing that, on the cusp of this case report, because I knew hyperbaric oxygen would just be dangerous to even consider in a 1 month old child. I told them, follow up with me in the next 6 months and we'll see if we can get you down to New Orleans and help get you into Dr. Hart's program. And they never called me back until February, the middle of February this year. And they sent me all these incredible videos of their child who's just outperforming every expected neurodevelopmental situation. The child seems to have almost a photographic memory.
Praise God.
They showed me video of him the night before, kind of memorizing a pattern in a basically a go fish kind of card array. And then the next day, this kid is just amazingly just putting all these cards, flipping all these cards over and saying, oh, here's this one, here's this one. And so that was all basically just the kind of, brute force feeding of mom, these 3 amino acids, which in the Dunbar family, it was just an oral dosing regimen of glutathione precursor amino acids, which is parallel to the physics play of the gentle air chamber that happened in the Carlson by physical means increased the intracellular glutathione synthesis in Eden Carlson's brain. And also in both those protocols and concepts, what is happening is that NRF2, the nerf softball of all of our cytoprotective cascades is getting increased either by increased oxygen in the cell or increased glutathione in the cell.
Now, you actually sell this glutathione under something called ProImmune. We've got about 2 minutes left here. Can you go ahead and plug your website and direct our listeners to how they can actually get this product?
Well, there's unfortunately at the current moment in America, Dr. Crumb's IF200 is very difficult to obtain, and we have actually just run out here at molplathyperbarics.com.
Go ahead and repeat that one more time.
Actually, will you spell it out for our listeners?
Well, I think you can just go to ELATTE. You can call it Mop Latte. It's a latte of 3 amino acids that will mop up toxins in your cell.
There you go.
Moplatte.com
or lattehyperbarics.com, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Or just molplat.com.
Okay.
We're still in the building phase of our website and development and our little startup of sorts here, but
eventually people will be able to order the product again.
I really want to kind of get this across here though in our time here today.
You got about 30 seconds left, Dr. Fogarty.
An incredible physician named Laura Lyle, who's also a compounding pharmacist, who is working to get ProImmune 200 into multiple states for COVID-19 infected people who are self-quarantined. And she is building a huge clinical database of the response to this therapeutic protocol and simple feeding of vital amino acids. She's also the first woman physician who has been a part of the Vatican medical advisory team.
I'm going to have to stop you there, Dr. Fogarty. We'll keep you on a little bit longer into the social media, but thank you so much for joining Church and State. Really appreciate it. All right, Church and State is brought to you in part by Covenant Church and Mountain View Vital Medicine. Always remember the tree of liberty is most likely a birch, and with that, Church and State is out.
God bless. You're still
live on social media here, so we'll continue a little bit longer. Sorry to cut you short, but the radio has to stop there.
Right. So what I think we should really do for those who are remaining on with the social media side of things is really start to get into what I call as the airliner pandemic coverage stack concept. And so out in your guys' neck of the woods, Washington, obviously Boeing has a huge footprint, and there are a number of really incredible hyperbaric engineers, hyperbaric physicians, Boeing engineers, aviators, commercial airline pilots, and an incredible team build going on across the union. That's kind of centered out of extavita.org. Extavita is a multi-place hyperbaric clinic based in Raleigh, Durham, North Carolina area. And so my friend Ed DiGirolamo, he's a structural engineer. He's been building this clinic and getting this off the ground over the last 5 years. He came to me with a pitch that his brother Vinny, who works for Northrop Grumman, really kind of conceptualized in a white paper a couple weeks back, and they came to this idea, which is just so huge. It's incredible, but modern jetliners are actually hyperbaric chambers.
Mm-hmm.
And in Scotland, there's a hyperbaric occupational physician for 30 to 40 years who's been writing about this concept, and also increasing the footprint of hyperbaric medicine in the UK. Philip James is his name, and he has written an incredible book on hyperbaric medicine, historical perspective, scientific perspective, and I recommend everyone who wants to learn more about hyperbaric medicine, you should purchase Dr. Paul Harch's Oxygen Revolution book and Dr. Philip James's hyperbaric medicine history and revolution type book too. So anyway, when we're all actually getting on a commercial airliner, and I've actually documented this through an iPhone-based barometer. You get on, you go to SeaTac and you get on a plane and you're at 14 psi absolute, and that's what sea level pressure is. And you know that you bounce around, you're actually putting about 15 psi into a basketball or something. So that kind of concept is a little easier for people to understand. And when you leave the tarmac and then you fly up to about 9,000 to 10,000 feet, then the pilots close the cabin pressure, so it's no longer equalizing with the outside air, because at about 9,000 to 10,000 feet, you're getting to about 10 psi absolute. And that's that's a physiologic stress actually for a lot of people, to very quickly drop their pressure by almost 1/3. But so when you're in that flying hyperbaric chamber at 10 psi, and the outside pressure at 35,000 feet is more like 3 psi, you're basically in a 3-atmosphere chamber. I mean, those airliners are designed to protect the cabin from bursting in that 3-to-1 ratio of molecules inside of the chamber and versus outside the chamber. And just like an old hairspray can or aerosol can, the pressure in, like a soda stream bottle is times inside what the gas pressure is outside in the atmosphere. So that's the simple physics of it. And so when you actually land, so then when you're on your flight from Seattle to New York, LaGuardia, and so you're basically, for 3 hours, you're at 10 psi, and then you're coming down back to almost 15 psi. You're adding 5 psi. The pilot is adding 5 psi to your body as a commercial passenger over the descent from 10,000 feet down to LaGuardia at sea level. And so, our bodies every day in American transportation and global transportation are going through these 5 psi or 4 psi cycles all the time. And, you abstract that to, where I helped a great family in the Colorado Rockies who lives at 10 psi at 10,000 feet elevation in Eagle County, Colorado. And I put Bobby Casca into his own little soft chamber, hyperbaric chamber system and program to help him with dealing with some of the issues in his declining brain function, which is really directly related to how much oxygen is dissolved in his bloodstream under that lower pressure system and that altitude. So, when we're doing these things every day in transportation to our bodies, and yet nobody is articulating the concept of how powerful this is in a medical context to anyone, and how we can actually use this basic, simple physics to actually protect America at a biosecurity level against this pandemic virus, which is really it's an economic and it's a political destroyer.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
This virus is destroying our economy. It's destroying our political apparatus. We have a virtual trampling of the Bill of Rights, the U.S. Constitution, and all under the jurisdiction of, at some level, the CDC, the NIH, and public health departments around the country. And so when you you simply think about like how easy it is, really easy it is, to reverse a pandemic viral replication cycle with increased air pressure, which was done already in America in 1918 during the Spanish flu epidemic.
Interesting.
By Orville Cunningham, MD, who was, he took a Kansas University medical student who was basically dying, put him into a 20-person super tanker type of, you know, it's just basically a big propane tank that he had his biomedical team at the University of Kansas Medical Center back in those days just turned a propane tank into a pressure vessel. And just with 1.6 atmospheres of room air, he was able to reverse this acute pandemic cytokine storm, mountain sickness like acting clinical syndrome that we're all seeing now all over the country, and we saw in China too, that this virus is not directly impacting the lungs in a classic infectious disease pneumonia syndrome. It is creating more of a blockade of the oxygen being able to diffuse through the fluid, the ground glass like fluid that we're seeing on the CT scans. Oxygen is not able to diffuse through there under pressure ventilators that are simply putting a kind of a force into the lungs, but not throughout the whole body, dissolving a lot more oxygen as we can with hyperbaric systems.
So, Dr. Fogarty, we're going to have to let you go here because we actually have to get ready for the live show that we're about to start. But I hate to cut you off there, but I do appreciate everything that you've been saying, and it certainly makes sense. I've been reading some studies about the fact that the ventilators are actually causing more harm in COVID-19 patients, and this is exactly what you're talking about.
So if I could just say one more thing.
Sure, go ahead.
Today.
Yes.
The United States Air Force in Ramstein, Germany, has already shown how a negative pressure environment inside of a cargo plane can be flown down onto a tarmac and protect that vessel. And actually, in a variable pressure environment, we've already got transportation of masses of people in a negative pressure biosecure environment. Now, had we had a whole bunch of pressure generators, air pressure generators, and even just the regular testing mechanisms on the ground, on the tarmac at Ramstein, they could have kept that vessel closed and plugged in 1.6 atmospheres of room air right into that vessel and started treating those COVID victims en masse right there.
Just sitting there on the tarmac.
U.S. Air Force Base. So this is coming. There's all the engineers have basically signed off, and the infectious disease people who are in the know are starting to kind of say, okay, yeah, this is really how we need to do this.
Interesting.
Yeah. All right. Well, hey, thank you so much again for joining Church and State. We really appreciate it, and we'll talk offline as well once we get done with the live show. So thank you, Dr. Fogarty.
Thank you.
All right.
Pastor Caleb, thank you.
Thank you, sir. All right. You need to.